Sagittarius, walking away without guilt. The spiritual art of letting go. Have you ever found yourself standing at a crossroads, one path lined with the familiar faces, roles and routines you've known for years, and the other stretching into an empty horizon lit by a quiet, inviting light? I'm Sophia, and welcome to Zodiac Wisdom, where we explore the tender truths the stars whisper to our souls. Today we begin a journey for every Sagittarius who has ever wondered, how do you know when it's time to walk away without carrying guilt on your back? Let me be clear. This is not a story about running from responsibility or cutting ties in haste. It is about liberation. It's about releasing yourself from the weight that was never yours to carry. It's about honoring the moment when holding on hurts more than letting go, and trusting that the universe, your ever-patient companion, has already prepared the ground for your next chapter. Astrologically, this lesson is etched deep within the 12th house, the realm of endings, closure, and karmic release. Here, Sagittarius learns that some exits are sacred acts, not failures. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to trust your own inner compass, even when the world asks you to justify every step. So if you've been standing at your own crossroads, feeling the gentle pull toward a lighter road ahead, stay with me. We'll walk through this together, gate by gate, until you see that walking away isn't always losing. It can be the most loving thing you ever do for yourself. And when you're ready, I'd love for you to like, share, and subscribe so we can keep meeting here, where astrology meets the courage to choose freedom. Gate 1: the whisper to leave. It rarely begins with a bang. More often, it begins as a whisper. A faint, persistent murmur in the back of your mind that says, this chapter is over. At first, Sagittarius, you might brush it aside. Life is busy. Responsibilities are calling. People expect you to keep showing up in the same ways you always have. But the whisper doesn't leave. In fact, it grows louder each time you silence it, until it becomes impossible to ignore. The most difficult part of this moment is that you often don't have proof that it's time to go. There may be no explosive fight, no betrayal, no glaring red flag to point to. From the outside, everything might even look fine. And yet, when you imagine staying, there's a heaviness in your chest. A quiet knowing that the river has run its course. You may even feel guilt for thinking about leaving, because no one has done anything to make you walk away. But your soul knows before your mind catches up. Astrologically, this is Neptune's domain. Neptune, the planet of intuition, dreams, and the unseen, doesn't deal in logic or linear timelines. It speaks in feelings, images, and subtle shifts in energy. Under Neptune's influence, Sagittarius may find themselves sensing that something has ended long before they can explain it. You might notice yourself feeling more tired in someone's presence, or that conversations leave you strangely hollow. You might start daydreaming about a different life, not out of dissatisfaction, but out of a deep, unshakable pull toward something you can't yet name. I remember working with a Sagittarius client named Elena. She was in a long-term job that she had once loved. There was no scandal, no toxic boss, no dramatic turning point. But one day, during her commute, she realized she had been fantasizing about a completely different career for months. I kept telling myself I was being ungrateful, she said. But the truth was, every time I thought about leaving, I felt lighter. Every time I thought about staying, I felt like I couldn't breathe. That's the whisper. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It simply offers you a glimpse of the peace waiting on the other side of letting go. The metaphor I often use here is that of a ship. Imagine you have been sailing for years through rough seas, navigating storms, patching sails, and bailing water with determination. Finally, you reach a calm harbor. The journey is complete. But instead of stepping onto the dock, you stay anchored in the boat, because you've grown used to the rocking, the repairs, the constant readiness for the next wave. Even when the storm is gone, you keep living as though it's just beyond the horizon. Leaving the boat feels strange even when the land is right there. Sagittarius, you are a sign that thrives on movement and exploration. But sometimes your adventurous nature can make you believe that endings are failures. You tell yourself you just need to adjust the sails, change direction, try harder. Yet there is a quiet wisdom in recognizing when the journey is complete, and that no amount of effort will breathe life into something that has already served its purpose. One of the most liberating truths you can embrace is that you do not need hard evidence to honor your own intuition. You don't need a dramatic reason to justify a gentle departure. If the thought of leaving brings a sense of relief, That in itself is a sign worth trusting. This is where Neptune's lesson is so profound. Not all truths can be proven on paper, but they can be felt in the marrow of your being. There is, of course, fear in this step. What will people say? Will they understand? What if you regret it? These are natural questions, especially for Sagittarius, whose heart values connection and loyalty. But here's the thing, your loyalty is meant to be mutual. Staying out of guilt serves no one. It keeps you from your next adventure, and it keeps others tethered to a version of you that no longer exists. When you begin to listen to the whisper, you may notice synchronicities. A book falling open to the exact message you needed. A conversation with a stranger that echoes your private thoughts. A song lyric that feels like it was written for you. These are Neptune's breadcrumbs, guiding you toward the shore. And here is the core lesson of this gate. Peace can be your proof. You don't need a grand justification to walk away. Sometimes the deepest wisdom comes in the form of a single question. If I left, would I feel lighter? If the answer is yes, you already know what to do. Gate to the release of weight. The moment you decide to walk away is not always loud or triumphant. Often it feels like a quiet exhale you didn't realize you've been holding for years. Sagittarius, when the choice is made in alignment with your truth, there's a shift inside you so subtle yet so profound. It's as if your shoulders drop for the first time in a long time. You may not notice it immediately, but the heaviness that once clung to you begins to dissolve, and in its place, there's an unfamiliar but welcome lightness. Strange, because before this point, you may have imagined leaving would feel like ripping something apart. And yes, there may be moments of grief, but alongside it, sometimes even stronger than the grief, is a sense of spaciousness, as though a door has opened and fresh air has rushed in. That's the paradox of release. You expect loss, but you find relief. Astrologically, this sensation mirrors the energy of a full moon, especially when it falls in Gemini or Sagittarius. Full moons are moments of culmination and closure. They illuminate what has been hidden, not to shame or punish, but to help you see clearly what can no longer grow where it is. In the axis of Sagittarius and Gemini, the lesson is about truth and perspective, about releasing the stories you've told yourself in order to keep something alive, and making room for a narrative that honors who you are now. I once worked with a Sagittarius man named Kai, who had been in a business partnership for nearly a decade. The work was stable, the income steady, but the spark that once fueled their collaboration had faded. Every meeting felt heavier. Every project became a negotiation between what he wanted to create and what his partner would approve. When he finally decided to step away, he expected anxiety, financial fear, maybe even regret. Instead, he woke up the next morning and felt as though someone had taken a weight off his chest. It was like taking off a winter coat in spring, he told me. I didn't realize how heavy it was until it was gone. That's the essence of this gate. The decision to release often peels away years of subtle stress you've been carrying without noticing. Sagittarius, your adventurous heart is designed to roam. But when you've been carrying something for too long, your pace slows, your joy dims, and your curiosity is dulled. Once the weight is gone, your natural rhythm returns. Not in a rush, but in an organic unfolding. The metaphor of the coat is fitting. Imagine wearing a thick, heavy garment day after day, even in the heat, because it once kept you warm in a different season. You tell yourself it's necessary, that it's part of who you are. But the truth is, it no longer fits, and every step is harder because of it. Taking it off doesn't mean disrespecting the winter that once required it. It means acknowledging that the season has changed, and you are ready to move freely again. This release also changes the way you see the past. Without the constant strain of holding on, you can look back with softer eyes. You begin to see the good without clinging to it, the difficult without resenting it. The weight you release isn't just the relationship, job, or role. It's also the unspoken contract you made with yourself to keep carrying what was never meant to be permanent. For some Sagittarius souls, this moment arrives with ritual. You might write a letter you'll never send, acknowledging the chapter and then letting it go. You might clear out a drawer, donate belongings, or even rearrange your living space. These physical acts mirror the emotional release, signaling to your subconscious that you are ready for new energy to enter. For others, the release happens in a single breath, an inner decision that needs no outward display. Both are equally valid. From a cosmic perspective, The full moon energy teaches that release is a natural part of every cycle. The moon does not mourn when it begins to wane. It trusts that its fullness will return in time. Likewise, letting go does not mean you will never feel fullness again. It means you are making space for the next tide to rise. Sagittarius, the greatest gift of this stage is the reminder that release is not always loss. Sometimes it is a return to yourself, to your natural pace, to the joy that was buried under the weight of what you were holding. You may find that your laughter comes more easily now, your sleep is deeper, your thoughts less cluttered. You may notice the way sunlight feels warmer on your skin, or how your breath feels richer in your lungs. These are not small things, they are the body's way of telling you that you are back in alignment. The release of weight is a turning point. It's the moment you stop defining yourself by what you hold on to and start defining yourself by the space you create for what's next. And while there may still be moments of uncertainty ahead, you now carry the knowledge that your freedom is worth more than the comfort of familiarity. That knowing will be your compass for the rest of this journey. Gate 3: The silence that heals. When the dust settles after you've walked away, there is a temptation to fill the space immediately, to replace the relationship, the role, or the identity you've just left behind. Sagittarius, your restless spirit may crave movement, something new to point your arrows toward. But this is where the deeper lesson arrives. Sometimes the most profound healing happens in the silence between chapters. In the beginning, that silence can feel strange, even uncomfortable. You may wake up and instinctively reach for the phone to text someone who is no longer part of your daily life, or find yourself starting to say "we" before realizing there's only "I know." The old rhythms echo for a while, but gradually the stillness starts to feel like oxygen. Without constant noise, external or internal, you begin to hear your own voice again. Astrologically, this is where Saturn steps in, the great teacher of patience, discipline, and slow growth. Saturn's wisdom is rarely flashy. It's steady and deliberate. It reminds you that building anything lasting, especially your own inner world, requires time. In this gate, Saturn teaches you that you don't need to rush to fill the empty space. The pause is not a void to escape from. It's fertile ground for what will come next. I once worked with a Sagittarius woman named Claire, who had ended a long and emotionally draining friendship. In the past, whenever she lost a connection, she would quickly immerse herself in new social circles to avoid feeling lonely. This time she chose differently. She stopped making weekend plans for a while, spent more evenings at home, and started journaling in the mornings. At first it felt unnatural. She worried she was withdrawing too much. But within a few weeks, she noticed her anxiety had eased, her energy had returned, and she felt a clarity she hadn't known in years. "It's like I let the garden rest," she said. "Now I'm ready to plant again." That metaphor of the garden is one of my favorites for this stage. After a season of constant harvest, the soil needs to rest. If you keep planting without pause, the ground becomes depleted. By letting the land lie fallow, it regenerates. Likewise, by allowing yourself time without forcing new commitments, you replenish your own emotional and spiritual resources. This silence is not about isolation, it's about restoration. There's a difference between withdrawing out of fear and choosing solitude for healing. In this phase, your alone time becomes a sanctuary, not a prison. You might use it to reconnect with passions you set aside, to reflect on what you've learned, or simply to rest without guilt. The key is that you are not rushing. You are trusting. Saturn also teaches discernment here. In the quiet, you become more aware of what truly nourishes you and what merely distracts you. The absence of constant noise allows you to hear the subtle messages of your intuition. Those whispers that were drowned out when your days were filled to the brim. You start to notice how certain activities make you feel, which conversations leave you energized or drained, and which people respect your pace versus those who push against it. For Sagittarius, this may be one of the hardest gates because your natural instinct is to keep moving. Stillness can feel like stagnation if you haven't yet learned its value. But once you do, you realize it is not wasted time. It's sacred time. Just as the archer must steady their breath before releasing an arrow, you must allow this pause to center yourself before stepping into the next phase of your life. I often suggest simple rituals to honor this gate. Morning walks without your phone, evenings without background noise, meditating under the moon, or even small acts like brewing tea slowly, paying attention to each movement. These rituals are not about productivity, They are about presence. And in that presence, healing happens quietly but powerfully. There is another hidden gift in this silence. It teaches you that you do not need constant external validation to feel whole. When the world is quiet and no one is affirming your worth, you begin to generate that affirmation from within. This self-sufficiency is not about cutting yourself off. It's about building a foundation so strong that when you do open your gates again, you welcome others from a place of abundance, not need. Eventually, the silence will start to hum with possibility. You'll feel the stirrings of new desires, fresh ideas, and connections that align with the person you've become. But you won't be rushing toward them out of fear. You'll be meeting them from a place of readiness. That's when you'll know this gate has done its work. The silence that heals is about trusting the pause, even when it feels unfamiliar. It's about letting the soil rest, the water still, and the arrows remain in the quiver until your aim is steady again. And in that stillness, Sagittarius, you rediscover something priceless. Your own voice, clear and strong, guiding you toward the next horizon. Gate for the blessing of detachment. There comes a moment after the silence, Sagittarius, when you look around and realize, not everyone you once loved will walk with you into the next chapter. And for the first time, this realization doesn't break you, it frees you. This is the blessing of detachment, the understanding that love does not require holding on, and release does not erase affection. In the past, you may have clung to relationships, roles, or identities out of loyalty, habit, or the hope that they might one day transform into what you've always needed. But now, standing on the other side of the gates you've already passed, you see the truth with a clarity that feels almost like grace. Some connections are meant for a season, not a lifetime. Their purpose has been fulfilled, even if you once imagined forever. Astrologically, this stage belongs to Uranus, the planet of awakening, disruption, and liberation. Uranus doesn't gently suggest change. It jolts you into it, sometimes with events that feel sudden but are, in truth, the result of years of quiet preparation. Under Uranus influence, Sagittarius finds the courage to step fully into freedom, understanding that detachment is not abandonment, it is alignment. I once worked with a Sagittarius artist named Ria, who had a mentor she deeply admired. This mentor had guided her early career, offering opportunities and advice that shaped her work. Over time, however, Ria began to notice that the relationship had shifted. The encouragement turned into subtle control, the praise into criticism that kept her dependent. She resisted acknowledging it for months, afraid of seeming ungrateful. But eventually she understood. The greatest way to honor what her mentor had given her was to take the next steps without them. It was like opening my hand and watching a bird fly away, she told me. I thought I was setting them free, but I realized I was freeing myself too. That image, the open hand, the bird in flight, is the perfect metaphor for this gate. Holding on too tightly can suffocate what you love, while letting go allows both of you to follow the path you are meant to take. And here is the profound truth. Love that survives detachment is the purest kind, because it asks nothing in return. For Sagittarius, whose heart is wired for adventure and truth, detachment can feel bittersweet. You may grieve the shared moments, the familiar comfort, the identity that came from being us instead of me. But you also begin to notice how much lighter you move without the invisible strings that once held you back. Detachment doesn't harden your heart, it clears it, making space for relationships that thrive in mutual freedom. This stage also changes how you view endings. Instead of labeling them as failures, you see them as necessary transitions. You no longer measure the value of a connection by its longevity, but by its authenticity and its impact on your growth. This is Uranus' gift. The understanding that freedom is not a betrayal, and change is not a rejection of what came before. I've seen Sagittarius souls struggle here, especially when others don't understand their choices. Friends might say, "But you two were so close," or "You've worked there forever, why leave now?" In those moments, the blessing of detachment is remembering that you are the only one who can feel the truth of your path. It doesn't need to make sense to anyone else. The beauty of this gate is that it allows you to love without chains. You can wish someone well from afar, honor their role in your life story, and still keep walking in the direction your soul calls you toward. And the same applies to how you hope others will treat you, allowing them to release you without resentment when your paths diverge. From a practical perspective, detachment also sharpens your ability to choose wisely. When you no longer fear the end of a connection, you stop compromising your values to keep it alive. You invest in relationships and commitments that feel alive in the present, not ones you're clinging to out of nostalgia for the past. Sagittarius, the blessing of detachment is not coldness. It is clarity wrapped in compassion. It is knowing that you can care deeply without losing yourself, that you can release without bitterness, and that you can trust the universe to fill the space with what is meant for you next. And when you look back, you will see that this gate was never about losing people, it was about finding yourself. Conclusion: the sacred exit. Sagittarius, you began this journey standing at a crossroads, torn between the comfort of the familiar and the call of an unknown light ahead. At first, it was only a whisper, an intuitive nudge that something had reached its natural end. You listened even without the proof the world told you to seek. That was your first act of courage. From there, you felt the weight lift. You discovered that release isn't always loss. It can be the doorway to relief, clarity, and freedom. You gave yourself permission to take off the heavy coat you've been wearing for too many seasons, and suddenly your steps became lighter. Then came the silence. You didn't rush to fill the space or numb the absence. You let the stillness do its quiet work, restoring your energy and allowing your inner voice to rise above the noise. In that sacred pause, you remembered who you were before you started caring so much for others. Finally, you embraced the blessing of detachment. You realized that love doesn't require possession, and endings don't erase the meaning of what came before. You opened your hand, let the bird fly, and found that your own spirit took flight too. This, Sagittarius, is the sacred exit, not an escape, but a conscious choice to honor the truth of where you are and where you're going. Under Jupiter's expansive gaze and the guidance of the cosmos, you are reminded that every closed door is an invitation to a path better aligned with your soul. So, if you're standing at your own threshold, trust yourself. You're not abandoning anyone. You're simply coming home to yourself. And when you do, the universe meets you there with open arms. If this message speaks to your heart, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe to Zodiac Wisdom. Together, we'll keep exploring the ways the stars guide us, not to predict our fate, but to help us live it fully and fearlessly.